Welcome to NewsNale episode number 16. NewsNale brought to you by Nails Ed, a learning and development platform focused on professional communications. Please visit our website at nailsed.com. Today we are joined with Bjorn Nabozney, the founder of Big Sky Brewery, the makers of the famous Moose Drool Ale. And we're going to be joined by Bjorn quite soon here. And we'll get right to it. All right, we are here with Bjorn from Big Sky Brewing. And as I said, the makers of the Moose Drool beer. I got to tell you, Bjorn, when I first came to Montana to ski, it was probably at least 10 years ago. And we're off on the East Coast and everyone said, oh, we got to get the Moose Drool. We got to get the Moose Drool. Like, how in the world did awareness get all the way out to the East that long ago?
Oh, it's amazing. It's, our beer Moose Drool has been kind of a phenom, and it started off as kind of a joke for us, but it really has turned into global reach. It's also ironically one of the most recognizable things about the state of Montana. So we've had a lot of fun with that one over the years. I think the timing was right. And when we launched the beer, and it has legs. It's been with us then basically the entire 27 years of the existence of our brewery. Wow.
Is that the only one that's been there from beginning to end, all 27 years?
Well, the beer industry is a lot different when we first started. Beers basically were defined by, your breweries were defined by a style. So back then there were a lot fewer breweries. When we started, there was only 600 of us in the United States. I think there was 5 in Montana at that point. There's right around 100 right now in the state. So we, if you look at like Widmer Brothers, they brewed a Hefeweizen, and you had the folks down at New Belgium, they brewed Fat Tire, the amber. And so we were looking for a niche that was, in broad terms, we're like nobody had really dove into the brown ale category. There's Newcastle brown ale, and so we're like, hey, this looks like a good category for us. Let's dive into this, and so we became basically the brown ale brewery, for lack of a better term.
Gotcha. Wow. So how'd you get there? How'd you get from I'm a freshman in college and then I'm running a brewery or started a brewery? What's the journey? What's the story?
It's kind of interesting. Working as a brewer has been the only thing I've done basically my entire adult life. For me, the adventure and the journey of starting a brewery started for me in college. I had to write a business plan for one of my classes, and it was actually a finance class. That the professor was like, I want you to think outside of the finance box. And she gave us the task of, write what you think a business plan should be. And back at that point, business plans, it's more like a bank packet, I think, is what we were more prepared for or preparing ourselves for. But as I was going through the idea, I was actually working at a ski shop with the other guys that I founded the brewery with. They were actually the brewing component of it. And so I was talking about to them after the class, like, wow, I have to write a business plan and I don't know what the heck to do. And so we were BSing about that, and I'd been messing around with them home brewing and I had interest in beer anyway. And so I spoke with them and said, hey, why don't we try to start a brewery, together, and I'll write a business plan and let's go for it. So I went down the rabbit hole of writing which would be our first iteration of a business plan, submitted it to my professor, and it actually got a pretty low score. I was like mid C on it. I thought it was a great idea, but back then at that time, like, brewery, what are you thinking? That's not a viable business. And so people were shooting holes in my idea, in our idea, but I thought, well, I think this thing could work. So went from a C grade to something that I've done basically my entire adult life.
And were the two friends, were they working in a brewery? Did they have any knowledge of it?
No,
And
no, they
none
were
of
just
you had,
none of us had any experience.
wow.
And from, I'd had those their home brews, and the problem with home brewers always think their beer is the best, and then you try it, and that's one of my least favorite things to do is critique home brews, unfortunately, because it's hard to make a good home brew, and because you have temperature controls and other things. And when I first tried their beers before I started brewing with them, and they were pretty adept at it, and I was like, wow, these are actually kind of good. I didn't know much about craft beer other than I'd had a few, and I was like, wow, these are kind of interesting. But my beer drinking is mainly relegated to like PBR and Rainier and other things like that. And so for me, it was really an awakening of the prospect of trying to do something here in the state with a couple of buddies of mine. So,
Wow.
and I'm the last one remaining. They've both, Brad left after about 7 years into it. He decided the lifestyle was not for him. And then the other co-founder, Neil, recently retired. They were both older than me by about 10 years.
Gotcha. Did you ever go back to the professor that gave you the C and say, look what happened?
No, I don't know what happened to her. Otherwise I would. Yeah, she changed schools. And so I always wonder what I should actually track her down and say, her name is Claudia, and say, Claudia, look, it worked.
It worked. See, who knew? So interesting, the business plan. Do you think it helped? Because there's arguments back and forth. You see like, oh, you don't need a business plan, just go do it, and don't confine yourself. And then I'm on the other side of things. Like if you don't have a path, or if you don't know where you're going, any path will take you, right?
Yeah.
And they always point to like Zuckerberg and Cuban, like, yeah. And I always say, yeah, you can win the Powerball too. I mean, you can do it, but what do you think? Was it worthwhile going through the exercise? Did you follow the plan? How much did it change?
Well, I'm an absolute advocate of a plan. I think because anybody can have an idea, but converting an idea to reality requires some type of planning. And so from my perspective, I ended up doing a rewrite of that original business plan, the C grade. And as we progressed through it, I did about 50 rewrites in total from the time from the initiation of the idea to actual start of the business. And then we still do, planning cycles and written planning cycles. We don't go as far as we used to, but because the market seems to evolve so quickly, especially in the well, we're not really post COVID, but in the COVID era, it's hard to plan now. And so, but at least we have, with something that's written, at least you have an idea that you can, you have it on paper, and you go back and refer to what was I thinking. It gives me a reference in time of where I was in my thought process, or if I'd forgotten something, I can go back and take a look and go, oh yeah, we thought this part out, and just as a kind of a reset. So I'm a plan advocate, and I've helped a number of businesses start that initially didn't have a plan, and you sit down, it's like, okay, if you can put it down in writing, then it's probably more executable than just as thoughts in your head, in my mind.
Yeah. No, I love what you said. A boss used to say that, like, an idea is an idea. And he said, on anything like we agreed to, or he said, goes, write it down, or I have an idea, he goes, write it down, because it's not anything until you actually go through the process of thinking it through and writing it down. Yeah, I'm a big proponent. Yeah, I don't know how you know if you've made progress unless you have something to compare it against, right?
Yeah.
So how did you so you started out, you probably had some rough years, some good years. When did you think like, ooh, this actually might make it? Like what happened? When was the tipping point? Like, I think this is actually going to make it.
For me, it was pretty quick. From the initial plan to the time that we started the brewery was almost 3 years. And in that time I graduated from college, and I actually had some job lined up in the financial sector, which I opted not to do in pursuit of this. I believed early on, and one of my personality traits is I'm pretty tenacious, and once I started understanding how the structure of the beer industry works, I was like, wow, there's definitely room for us, and we can definitely step into this. And looking at our competitors at that point of what they had missed, I think interesting thing is that there was not a lot of breweries at that point, but our core competitors within, say, a 300-mile radius of the brewery didn't really understand their customer. And I took it from the approach of trying to understand the consumer and come backwards into the beer. And so when we were doing this, I was like, wow, I was, at the end of the day, I would argue successful businesses, you're better at the study of consumer and human behavior than your competitors, and giving them what they want. So I was an early believer, advocate. Sorry, there's some background noise going on.
That's all right.
If I don't or not. So
gotcha.
So did that answer that question? I kind of.
I mean, what was it? So it was a couple years in. So you had 3 years before you had a beer coming out that you could put in market. It took that long to get everything built up.
Yeah, because we didn't have any money, and so I was figuring out how we were going to do a funding source, and really, being at the lead edge of the industry, there wasn't a lot of believers outside of ourselves. Not a lot of cheerleaders out there going, "Hey, you can do this." I got a lot more of like, "Wow, nobody's ever going to drink that." So I don't know.
Not a lot of models to cover in Montana. Did you have to do anything with the regulatory bodies, or was it what it is now? It hasn't, the 12 till 8 and
oh my gosh.
pints for.
Yeah, when we first started, you couldn't even offer pints for sale. Our laws in Montana are still antiquated as compared to the surrounding states. But that's a whole separate conversation. The state of Montana did not get what we were doing. The local government at the state level, it was, even the feds were a little bit behind the curve at that point. But Montana was particularly challenging, and we probably picked one of the worst places in the Northwest to actually start a brewery. But we don't want to leave the state.
Right. Yeah. In the Northwest, I'm just reading an article, New Jersey, man, you don't even want to think about.
No.
That's the craziest thing I've ever seen. The rules there, and they haven't changed. And I remember like 7 or 8 years ago, a friend of mine was trying to start it up and had to fight the government, and now they can't promote. It's really weird, and it generates revenue. That's what I don't understand. It generates revenue for the state.
Yeah, and that's what's been kind of our main source of frustration in the slow evolution of Montana alcohol law is it's still very oppressive in that we don't believe in consumer choice, and that our consumers are adults. They can respond like adults, and we can, we just it's kind of a nanny state that we've got going here. And ironically enough, being from the West, you would think, or places like Utah would be a real tough place to start a brewery with. They actually have friendlier laws now than Montana.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So
you started off with no funding. How did you finance this? How did you guys do this?
So with the way the financial model went is, I looked at how are we going to do this? We were young. I was at the point, when we first started writing the plan, I was 22. And so, putting it together, not having a funding source, there's no immediate family for dollars. Not that knowing what I know now, I'd want to go, if I had funding from family, I probably wouldn't have wanted to go in that direction anyway. But I formed us up as a C Corp. And then from there, so we were trying to sell shares. And And in the meantime, as I formed us up, we incorporated basically in October of '93 was the when we incorporated as a Montana company. I was visiting banks at the same time because I knew we'd need some type of debt structure along with an equity infusion. So what in my initial plan, I knew we needed to raise about $300,000. And so talking with developing a relationship with the local bank, they're like, okay, we can do an SBA backed loan. You come up with with a third, and we can finance 2/3. So I need $300,000. So it was a pretty straightforward equation. I need to come up with $100,000, and then set and process for the loan, for an SBA backed loan of $200,000. That was the most difficult. The most difficult part for me in this process was I was the guy that was supposed to get the money. Brad and Neil were going to make the beer and do the operational side of things. And so diving in, as it turns out, as a privately traded C Corp in Montana, I could approach 7 people in a calendar year as a potential investor. So I had to do a bunch of background research. We didn't have the advantage of the internet now. I couldn't just, go willy-nilly and come to you and say, oh, here, I've got a great idea, and give you my executive summary and talk about it, because that would in essence in Montana, that would constitute an offer on my part for you to sell shares. And so that would be check off, so I had 12 months then I'd have to wait to use that slot. So,
wow.
So it was really an arduous process when I first started. But how I would put it all together is I asked a lot of dumb questions in and around town. First of all, is I knew we needed an attorney, and I had no idea where I would find an alcohol attorney. Much easier now than it was then. But so I went to beer distributors and said, hey, who's your attorney? And so I kept getting this name. Harry Haynes kept popping up. He's now a federal judge. And so I went down to his office one day and said, hey, I'm trying to put together a brewery with some buddies, and I need an attorney. And he actually did a whole bunch of pro bono work for me because he thought it was going to be a fun project. And it was Warden, Thane, and Haynes at that time. Now it's Warden, Thane. But there still are attorneys, other than Harry has gone off and done judge stuff. But then at the same time, as I was building this, I knew we needed an accountant, and we needed from an accounting firm that was, because I was trying to offer shares that was legitimate, that people knew their name. So it was Galusha Higgins. Galusha was our first accounting firm. It's not Whiffley. But I approached one of their partners and said, hey, we've got this project going, and this is what I need to do. I was essentially putting together I don't know if they use the term, but I was putting a tombstone together of the accounting firm, my accounting, as accountants, lawyers, names that were known. And I wanted to affiliate myself with those names as I made my approaches. And so I did a lot of legwork as I was leading up, into this. And so I actually got the accounting firm to do a bunch of pro bono work for us as well. I sold a pretty good dog pony show to these guys, yes, and we're still their customers. So, and what we gained out of it is Harry kicked us down to an associate, and Mike Duffield kicked us down to an associate, and we got a bunch of work out of them to help put this all together, and so, which is really fun because they're lifelong friends. The associate that did our initial financials is now our CFO all these years later. So,
wow.
So we reeled him in, and our associate lawyer, he's now a judge. So we're on to a different attorney now, but we've spent millions of dollars over the years. They invested in our idea, and we gave them lifetime worth of business now. So
Nice.
so that
Awesome.
started that whole thing, the layers.
Yeah.
There were a lot of layers to this. And it was slow. It was arduous, and very frustrating. So I said, if we were at that point, if we were in a little bit more business savvy state, and doing with, in other states that are used to creative financing, let's say,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, and had more of an entrepreneurial spirit, I think Montana was really kind of tight then. It would have been a much quicker startup for us.
Gotcha. And then you could only go to 7 people after you got all that set up. How'd you select
Yeah.
the 7? How down the world?
I went down to the I spent a lot of time at the library, and then I started going through tax records and then listening to folks. So it's like, how in the world do you find these people? And so one of the people that I was talking to, he was like, Bjorn, there's 2 people. He's like, in your business, you don't want people that are active in your business. You want investors. And he said, those 2 people, he's like, people that are not very good at business he went doctors and lawyers. And he said, so focus your list of potential investors. And he's like, and then he prefaces, it's like, I would lean more towards doctors because lawyers sue you. And so I found a list of, I kind of molded my list into some doctors that I made an approach, and doctors talk. And so I made an approach to Jim and Kay Kane were 2 of our lead investors, and Kay thought it was a wonderful idea, but the question that kept coming up, it was almost the universal first question was, how much money have you raised? And for me, it was like, well, none yet, but you could be the first. And so, but it really slowed the process because nobody wanted to be the first. Nobody wanted to be the first lemon to jump off the cliff. And so what I ended up doing is I worked in the timber industry, and I worked as a logger and in forest products. So I went back to one of my bosses that owned a lumber mill, and he was a manufacturer. And so his name is Kurt Larson. He owned American Timber up out north of Whitefish. And I said, Kurt, I'm not having any luck getting investors. I'm trying to start a brewery. And he's like, well, tell me a little bit about it. And I was like, this is what I'm doing. The plan is we're going to be a production brewery. We're going to sell, X amount of states and blah, blah, blah. And after about 5 minutes of me talking, it wasn't very much talking on my part. He's like, how much money you need? I said, I need $100,000. And that said to go get a $200,000 bank loan. And he's like, I'm in for 30. And I'm like, really? He's like, well, then his position was somebody's got to be first. And so he was, after basically 2 years of trying to get an investor, he was in. And in 5 minutes, I was like, why was I so dumb? Why didn't I not come to him first? But in the process of this, it's one of those gifts that you're handed, that we didn't do it too quickly, because in the meantime, developing our business model, how are we going to go to market, and taking the strategy from consumer back to us, I developed a distribution network. I developed, a chain of, kind of had 100 bars basically from day one that wanted our product. And so it was one of those things that I got to develop relationships and understand how the market actually worked by that gift of not having an investor right away. It forced me to be on my A game, and us as a brewery. I never even offered anybody samples, just an idea of what we were going to do. So from a person that had no samples, no idea how to, I didn't know anything about, really about production, manufacture of beer, but in that time figured it out, and never, from the inception of the plan to our first beer, I never offered a sample to anybody in that time, just an idea, a concept.
Wow.
So
it sounds like
the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like you're really good at, and you've seen the value of building that network and staying connected to people, because you never know, right? And you can always learn from someone. So who would have thought when you were doing lumber work that, well, someday I'm gonna have a brewery and someday Kirk's gonna be able to help me out. I mean, you don't think that
Yeah.
way, but you always keep those relationships, right?
Yeah. I think I don't care what the industry is. I think we as humans are relationship driven. And I think it's important to part of business is retaining relationships, even if it's a dissimilar industry. Like in this case, for me, it was logging to making beer. And from the when Kurt said yes, after Kurt said yes, it took me 2.5 months to raise the rest of the funds. So
Wow.
it was, and that was just because of the gap of time of actually getting to meet with people and my work schedule, because I was still working, and while doing this. So
Wow.
it was fun. I learned, but I really learned my biggest thing that my takeaway from that was learning some patience, because I thought, oh, this has just happened right now, and nothing works like that in the real world usually.
Yeah. Hi, Mark Rinaldi, who we're going to interview later, at BioSqueeze, used to be the dean at MSU. I ran into him. He goes, "Oh yeah, it's after 5 years, you're an overnight sensation." You know,
How true is that?
right?
Yeah.
So, are those original shareholders still shareholders, or did they cash
Yeah,
in?
we
Or
do.
did they...
We have a group of them still that, I think, like there's a number of the initial ones that we bought up, but we still have a, a decent group of the originals. I think because they like the idea of being part of a brewery, and
Right.
so that it's fun for them. You know, all I'd ever advise to anybody is like, if you're going to invest in my project, only invest enough that would it kind of piss you off if you lost it,
Right.
because this isn't 100. This isn't a guaranteed thing, and so and so they have fun with it. They think it's it's like for them it's fun. They get to be part of a brewery, and
Yeah.
which is fun in itself. So
Nice job. That's awesome. So, so what do you think's the biggest difference now from when the early years in your business and the brewing industry and the challenges that you're facing?
I'm glad we're an established brewery. I wouldn't want to start now. I mean, the market saturation is crazy. If you look at just in the Bozeman market area, there's 18-ish breweries now in and around Bozeman. And in Montana, like I said, we're right at 100. It seems to stay right at 100 here now. Like I said, when we started, there's 5 of us basically, and all fairly regionalized too, in small regions of the state. So there's 625 breweries in the United States when I started. Now there's 10,000. So the market dynamic has changed dramatically. And everybody's, we've gotten to the habit of our industry is chasing style. Somebody makes one beer and everybody else all of a sudden is making it. So how you used to be defined brews by a particular style beer, now it's defined by your marketing prowess, I think, more so than beer style.
Gotcha. And you were telling me you solved some big production problem that Budweiser needed your help on.
Oh yeah. This is years ago. I was looking for an alternative package to glass. There weren't canning lines that were small enough for the craft segment, and so I started in the late '90s working on shaping an impact extruded bottle. So I'd seen, it's basically a hairspray bottle, and I'd called a company and asked if they could shape it like a beer bottle, and they're like, I think we can. And so we went down the rabbit hole of taking aluminum and shaping it like a bottle, and you still see it now. There's varieties that have that have been spawned off that idea of initially when we came up with, hey, let's do an aluminum bottle. And so we came out with our bottle. We actually, when it came into production, we were working with a company out of Spain to do it, and we couldn't afford the to complete the project. The dies were about $250,000. Heineken caught wind of what we were doing, and I had a conversation with folks over there at the bottle manufacturer. They said Heineken would pay for the dies if we would release distribution to them, or the proprietary shape of the bottle outside the United States. And we're like, heck yeah, let's do this. So we teamed up with Heineken, made a bottle. We got in the US, and it took us a long time to do that because, again, we're a small company, not have a lot of money. And Budweiser caught wind of what we were doing, and they wanted to jump into the impact extruded bottle business, and they're still in. Obviously, we're not in there anymore. But they couldn't get their bottles to run, and they were having issues with their failure rate of their bottles, and comes down to the angles, and the engineers that I got to work with were pretty in tune with how the bottle would react to downward force and pressure, and then running down the line. So Budweiser couldn't get theirs to run, so they gave us a call, and I said, "Hey, would you mind giving us a hand?" I was like, "Sure, let's." So they flew 9 of their operations folks up to here at that point it was a World Select bottle. I still have one, and they couldn't figure out why it wouldn't run, and it was just a couple of those things that was the elephant in the room on the bottle. Was they just had a couple different minor problems and said, "These are your problems here, on the top of the bottle and on the bottom. There's some friction issues." And they're like, "Wonderful." And they took that back to the big house in St. Louis, and they went to our manufacturer and placed it was a huge order, basically a 10 million bottle standing order, and which we were only buying, I don't know, like 20,000-30,000 bottles at a time. And they essentially took us out of the aluminum bottle business at that point.
Oops.
So they took all the supply. So I let the fox in the hen house on that one.
And then you had to move on. So what do you think the biggest issues facing you today?
I think we've got a couple. I think the primary issue is market saturation. How do you stay relevant in a market, in an industry where you have so many competitors, and the concept of local breweries. If you're not there in some towns, you're not local enough if your brewery's 5 blocks out of a certain district. So really, it's maintaining that relevance that of quality over location, I think, is really important. Montana has made it kind of sexy out of state because Montana is a sexy place, and so that helps ease that. But even at that, you're still on the micro markets that you're competing in have really been difficult in that there's so many of us now. I would say the other part is kind of a COVID everybody thing is supply chain. Supply chain and labor force have been really challenging, to say the least, for the last couple of years. Supply chain more than labor. What we've ended up doing is, with our labor woes, we've unfortunately just automated more, and so and I don't think anybody really wants to do that, but force of nature right now, we have a tight labor market. Machines are replacing people for us.
You're not the first person I've heard say that. I mean, and you can just check out in any kind of repeatable process business, especially fast food. I noticed that, anytime I go into some place fast food, and I do it like once a year, going through Helena to go fish the Missouri, less people in there, more technology.
More technology. I mean, and it's really a double-edged sword. I mean, and the labor that we get, the skill sets tend to be lower because young people are starting work at a later age in life than say when I was a kid. I started working in the woods when I was 14, so I already had developed my work ethic, and or the inklings of what I thought was in work ethic at that point, which you further develop as you mature. But we're hiring people that have never had a job before at age 18, age 19, and so they're behind the curve. But the labor laws don't help in that we don't want that they're anti underage, so many parameters to what
Right.
to get people to working at a younger age. So I think though that those three things basically are our largest single challenge right now.
Gotcha. And where do you see it going in the future? How much longer
Well,
are you going to be doing this, and do you think it's going to change? What are you going to do to stay on top? Big question.
Well, I think for us, looking at looking forward, I think there's always opportunity in the market. You just have to be looking for that opportunity, be prepared to meet it. And so, it's innovation in beer style is, some of the easy things. But I think when we look really in stabilized our supply chains, well, one thing what we've been fortunate with is we don't use a lot of, basically we don't use foreign suppliers on our raw material side. So
Right.
we have the stability on that side, in a normal cycle. Say, once we're removed enough from COVID, I think our local supply chains will have normalized enough, and it's my hope. But so we don't have other than major pieces of equipment, on a capital purchase, we don't have those supplies coming in, say, from China or around
Right.
the world. Montana grows some of the best barley on the planet. Our neighbors to us, we have great hops too here, but our neighbors in Washington, we've got hops. We've got the stuff we need is all here. Our aluminum can suppliers, our cans come out of Wyoming. And cardboard out of Washington State. So from the supply chain side, as we look at that and as that stabilizes, I think we get to return to innovation and coming up with more fun brands. So I really am looking towards the future because I work in a really fun industry. Hasn't been as much fun since COVID, but
Right.
for me, the prospect of our breweries is pretty bright.
Nice. Yeah, I heard that. Like, doesn't Washington State produce some large percentage of all the hops in the U.S.?
Massive. Yeah,
Yeah.
I couldn't beg on a percentage, but I'd probably say 70+% come out of that region. So
amazing. Yeah, you wouldn't know.
No.
So what motivates you to keep getting up every day?
I love what I do. I have so much fun. I mean, to me, while we work in a fairly challenging technical field, everybody has really low expectations of the beer guy. So for me, it's a lot of fun. I can be out at the bar having a couple beers. And if I were, say, a heart surgeon, nobody wants to see the heart surgeon having some beers, but you want to see your beer guy having beers. And so it's fun for me. My motivation every day when I get up, I'm excited to get to work. It's a rare occasion that I'll get up and go like, work today. Usually it's all right. I get to go to work. To me, it's,
Nice.
I love my job.
That's awesome. A little bit of stress in there. How do you handle the stress? What do you do?
Which is funny. I was thinking about stress, and I don't really feel a lot of stress, ironically enough. It's one of those things that, for me, I see a lot of challenges, but I don't feel a lot of stress. I think maybe that's because of the way that we structure our business. We don't have a lot of debt. So we don't have, I think, if your business has a debt component to it, that you're the slave to the lender, and there's always something that comes with that. And so not having debt really helps make your life a lot easier, because what I have to focus on doing the best that we can on our sales side and our production and making a world-class product. And so when you have systems in place for that, they tend to take care of themselves. But I don't know, debt is worrisome if and when I do have it. So, I mean, we need it in some ways. It's a great tool, but I also look at it's not a detool from a business perspective. I think we've become a little bit dependent on that. I think one of the things that's interesting to me is right now with inflation going up, it's causing, and interest rates rising as a result of, everything that they're tying together with the Fed, that it's getting businesses to rethink how they operate a business. Debt was cheap. So I think you go towards the cheapest money, but no matter what it is, whether you get an equity investor or a debt investor, there's a cost associated with that. There are expectations on the end of both of those, but I would rather have it with an equity shareholder than a debt obligation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great point. Yeah, I think if people are looking at how they invest also and how they evaluate businesses. Are you actually profitable ever? Right? What is the path to profitability? And hopefully it's shorter than longer.
Yeah.
All right, well, go
that's
ahead.
a good point. I'm sorry, because I think we look at, a lot of businesses look at success as their top line, rather than we are within our company, we look at the bottom line. Did we make money? You can do a lot of cool things if you're making money, but if you're not making money, then you're out of business at some point. Cash flows run out. The willingness of shareholders or whatever. If you could have the best top line ever, if you have no bottom line, you don't have a business.
Yeah, and I think you're going to continue to see that shakeout. It surprised me. I looked at this list a couple of weeks ago. Like some businesses that you think are so successful have never been profitable. Like Airbnb is one. It's like, how can you not be profitable? You own no assets other than the IP in your software. Zillow, not profitable. Uber, of course. Lyft is, And what's your path? Because is it just top line growth at all costs? And I think what we're seeing is no. I mean, now it's about what is the model that makes money. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I talked to a number of breweries that have never made a profit in my peer group. I'm on the phone a lot. I reach out. I kind of ignore. For me, I don't have a go-to source that I go to daily. Say if I'm websites or any of that thing, I tend not to go down those rabbit holes, particularly post-COVID, because there's nothing good. But when I talk to my peers, I'll make phone calls. I have a bunch of different breweries around the United States that I call, hey, what does it feel like today? What have you got going? How are your sales? And so I can get real-time data rather than inferred data from my friend group. And those conversations about that we've never made a profit. I'm like, how can you have never made a profit? You're a brewery that's 20 plus years old, or whatever, and the newer ones, specifically within the 10-year range. And, we were, even when we were a young brewery, we were making a profit right away. I don't know how you can build not being profitable into your plan. Is that part of the plan not to make money? So.
Yeah. And what's the, aha moment when all of a sudden you are making, like, what are you chasing? What's going to change so they do make money if after 10, 20 years, what do you have to do?
You sell.
Well, yeah. So you were lucky that 200 that you borrowed, was that your only debt pretty much? And then you got going and paid it
early
back?
on. We revisited debt but we revisited debt when we built a new facility. Because at that point, when we built our facility, we went from basically a 5,000 square foot facility to a 35,000 square foot facility. Big jump. It was a big scary jump, especially at that point. But we were at that point, we were the second largest draft only brewery in the country. And we wanted to get into packaging beer because we saw that as the future, especially given Montana and its constraints with regards to its laws. So Montana was still considered a rural economy, and a lot of Montana is still a rural economy, but we got a USDA rural economic development loan. And at that point, this was in 2000 at 1.75% interest. So it was cheap money. And But always when you're dealing with the government, there's always some constraints or some golden handcuffs with that. The downside to that, well, we got a great interest rate. It limited our creativity on the other side. So we quickly got out of that loan. We got out of that loan as quickly as we could. And with what we had to do with that at a 1.75% loan, the payments were great. The interest rate was low, but we restructured our debt as quickly as we could. Once we got our feet back under us from building out this facility, we went back into the private sector, paid a higher interest rate, but it also gave us our freedom back.
Right. Well, thanks for your time. We're wrapping up here. My last question always is what would you tell your 21-year-old self, knowing what you know now?
Oh my gosh, that's a good question. What would I tell myself? I think, sorry, I'm coming in high because that's a big question. If I'm going to stay within a business thing, within the context of business, I would tell I tell myself two things. I would say, take more accounting classes and never fall in love with a plan. Because
Nice.
because the plans are you fall in love with a plan and you actually you put on the blinders as to the flaws that are potential in your plan. So those would be my two things, because I thought I had enough accounting when and I have a finance major, but you can never have enough accounting. Accounting is the language of business, and I didn't speak it well enough. And
That's great advice.
that would be my 21-year-old thing.
Wow. Well, that's great advice. Well, Bjorn, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you so much for your contribution to the beer industry. I know it's well loved in my group and with all our students, and I know our students are really enjoying working with you this semester.
Thank you.
So appreciate all the stuff you've been doing, and look forward to see you in person again.
Oh yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Soon.
So
Awesome.
are you done recording now? Because I know you can edit
No,
this.
I'm going to pause it right. So that concludes our interview with Bjorn Nabozney of Big Sky Brewery. Thanks, Bjorn, for coming on. And that's Big Sky Brewery, the makers of the famous Moose Drool Brown Ale, the Powder Hound Winter Ale, and the Big Sky IPA, as well as their spiked seltzers. Really enjoyed that with Bjorn. And that was our interview today. Our next NewsNale will come out next week. We'll be interviewing Elizabeth Johnson of Trialware. Look for that for our episode 17. Trialware is a startup here in Bozeman, creating devices to help pediatric cancer clinical trial patients ensure they stay with the trial throughout its course. And that's it for our NewsNale, brought to you by Nails Ed, a learning and development platform focused on professional communications in writing, presentations, and meeting management, ensuring all your communications are received first. That means they're focused, they grab interest, they're well-researched, they're very specific to one topic, and they have next steps that are time-based. And we offer online and in-person communications, teaching, and coaching. Please see our website at nailsed.com for details and pricing. And that's it for this NewsNale. Sky Montana and Abigail Soroka, producers, music by Slade Hudson, and fact-checking, story sourcing by Rancher Pete, who can be found on Instagram at Rancher Pete, M as in Mary T. And until next week, we glad you joined us here on the NewsNale. And we will see you next week.